Everyone laughed at Glenn Ford's joke until John Wayne slowly stood up and started walking toward him. The sun hung low over the Arizona desert. Monument Valley stretched behind them, those iconic red rock formations that had appeared in a dozen Wayne pictures. It was 1968. The set of a Western whose name doesn't matter because what happened that afternoon had nothing to do with the movie they were making. John Wayne was 61 years old. He'd had a lung removed 3 years earlier. Cancer. He moved slower now, breathed heavier. But he was still Duke. Still the man whose presence could command a room, a set, a screen. Glenn Ford was there as a favor. A cameo. 3 days of shooting. Ford was a legend in his own right. Gilda, the Blackboard Jungle, 310 to Yuma. Respected. Talented. Known for his professionalism. Also known, among those who worked with him, for his sharp wit. His ability to find the joke in any situation. His comfort with being the clever one in the room. That afternoon, between setups, the crew was relaxed. Waiting for the sun angle. Wayne sat in his canvas director's chair, the one with Duke stenciled on the back. He was reading something. A letter, maybe? His reading glasses perched on his nose. Ford stood nearby with a group of younger actors. They were laughing about something. The kind of casual set banter that fills the long hours between shots. And then Ford said it. "You know what I heard?" His voice carried across the set, loud enough that everyone turned to listen. "I heard Duke over there turned down High Noon. Said the story was un-American." A few nervous laughs. Everyone knew this was true. Wayne had famously refused the role that went to Gary Cooper. He'd called it a betrayal of Western values. A marshal who throws down his badge and asks for help. But here's the thing. Ford continued, warming to his audience. The man who turned down High Noon because it was too liberal. This is the same man who sat out World War II. Making movies while other men fought. The laughter stopped. The set went quiet in that particular way that happens when someone crosses a line they didn't know existed until they were already over it. Wayne didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply removed his reading glasses. Folded them slowly. Set them on the arm of his chair. And stood up. The movement took 4 seconds. 4 seconds during which every person on that set understood that something had shifted. That Glenn Ford, veteran actor and respected colleague, had just made a terrible mistake. Wayne started walking. Not fast. Not rushing. Just walking across the 30 feet of desert sand between his chair and where Ford stood. The younger actors stepped back. Instinctively. Creating space. Ford's smile died on his face. His hands, which had been gesturing to emphasize his joke, lowered slowly to his sides. Wayne kept walking. Wayne didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what Glenn Ford didn't know. What most people didn't know. What Wayne had carried quietly for 25 years. In 1942, John Wayne was 35 years old. He was married with 4 children. He was making movies. Westerns mostly. The kind of flag-waving patriotic films that kept American morale up while the real war was being fought on 2 fronts across 2 oceans. And he wanted to enlist. He went to the recruiting office 3 times. Each time he was told the same thing, "You're too old. You have dependents. You're more valuable making the films that keep spirits up at home." Wayne didn't accept it. He pulled strings. He contacted officers he knew. He was told, finally, by someone high enough in the chain of command that it was official. John Wayne would serve his country better on screen than in uniform. Republic Pictures held his contract. They threatened legal action if he enlisted. They had films scheduled. They had investors. They had obligations. Wayne made the films. Flying Tigers. The Fighting Seabees. They were expendable. He played soldiers and sailors and Marines. He saluted the flag and led charges and died heroically in grainy black and white while real men died in color in places whose names he'd learned to pronounce for the newsreels. And he carried the guilt of that for the rest of his life. He never spoke about it publicly. Never made excuses. Never explained. Because the men who actually served, the men who came back and the men who didn't, they didn't need his explanations. They had their own burdens to carry. But the guilt stayed. In the way he treated veterans on set. In the way he'd stop filming to shake the hand of any man wearing a service pin. In the way he'd visit VA hospitals without press, without cameras, sitting beside men who'd lost limbs and minds and futures, just listening. The crew knew some of this. The older ones? The ones who'd worked with Duke for decades. They knew about the hospital visits. They knew about the envelopes of money he'd send to widows. They knew about the quiet phone calls he'd make to help veterans find work. Glenn Ford didn't know. He'd heard the old story, Wayne sat out the war, and he thought it was fair game. A bit of professional ribbing between equals. He was wrong. Wayne stopped walking when he was 3 feet from Ford. Close enough that Ford had to tilt his head back slightly to maintain eye contact. The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 15. The crew stood frozen. The director started to step forward, thought better of it, stayed where he was. When Wayne finally spoke, his voice was quiet. That distinctive drawl, slow and measured, carrying across the silent set like he was delivering a line to the back row of a theater. "Glenn," Wayne said, "you and I are gonna take a walk." It wasn't a request. Wayne turned and started walking away from the set, toward the empty desert behind the false front buildings. Ford hesitated for exactly 2 seconds before following. The crew watched them go. 2 silhouettes moving into the scrub brush and red sand, growing smaller against the massive backdrop of Monument Valley. They were gone for 40 minutes. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most important part of this story is still unfolding. No one knows exactly what was said. Wayne never spoke about it. Ford, when asked years later, would only shake his head and change the subject. But the men who were on that set, the grips and gaffers and camera operators who watched 2 legends disappear into the desert, they saw what happened when Wayne and Ford came back. They walked back together. Not side by side exactly. Wayne slightly ahead. Ford following a half step behind. Ford's face was red. Not from sun. From emotion. His eyes were wet. Wayne's expression was unreadable. That famous stone face. The one that could convey everything or nothing depending on what the scene required. They reached the set. Wayne went to his chair. Sat down. Put his reading glasses back on. Picked up his letter like nothing had happened. Ford stood in the middle of the set for a long moment. Then he turned to the assembled crew, maybe 40 people, all watching, all waiting. "I owe everyone here an apology," Ford said, his voice thick. "What I said was out of line. It was cruel. And it came from ignorance." He paused. "Duke has more honor in his little finger than I have in my whole body. And I'm sorry." Wayne didn't look up from his letter. Just gave a small nod. Acknowledgement. Not forgiveness, exactly. Just acknowledgement. Filming resumed 20 minutes later. Ford completed his 3 days. He was professional. Perfect. But the easy banter was gone. He did his job and left. Years later, at a dinner in Los Angeles, someone who'd been on that set finally asked Wayne what he'd said to Glenn Ford during that 40-minute walk in the desert. Wayne took a long drink of his bourbon. Set the glass down. Considered the question. "I told him about the men I knew who didn't come home," Wayne said finally. "I told him about sitting in hospital rooms with boys who'd lost everything. I told him about the letters I got from mothers whose sons died playing soldier while I pretended on a soundstage." He paused. "And I told him that every joke he ever makes, every smart remark he ever delivers, every clever line he ever throws, it better be at his own expense. Because the moment you use another man's pain to get a laugh, you've shown everyone exactly how small you really are." The dinner table was quiet. "What did he say?" someone asked. Wayne smiled slightly. Not a happy smile. A sad one. He cried, Wayne said. And then he asked me how I lived with it. The guilt. What did you tell him? I told him you don't live with it. You carry it. And you let it make you better. You let it teach you that strength isn't about who you can beat. It's about who you can lift up when nobody's watching. Away from the cameras, Wayne made a choice no one expected. The story of what happened on that set spread slowly through Hollywood. Not as gossip. As legend. The kind of story that gets told to young actors as a lesson in humility. In respect. In understanding that the veterans you see on screen carrying rifles and leading charges, those men carry real burdens you can't see. Glenn Ford never told the joke again. Never made another crack at Duke's expense. When Wayne died in 1979, Ford was at the funeral. He stood in the back, hat in hand, and cried through the entire service. In his later interviews, Ford would sometimes reference, "A lesson John Wayne taught me." He'd never elaborate. Just shake his head and say, "Duke understood something most of us never learn. That real strength is quiet. That real courage is doing the right thing even when it costs you. That real honor is carrying your guilt without making excuses." The crew members who were on that set in 1968 told the story for decades. Most of them never knew exactly what Wayne said during that walk. But they all remembered the look on Glenn Ford's face when he came back. They all remembered his apology. And they all remembered the way Wayne had handled it, not with anger, not with violence, but with something more powerful. Truth. But what followed would stay with everyone who witnessed it, forever. 3 years after that incident, Wayne was on the set of The Cowboys. There was a young actor in the cast, barely 18, fresh from theater school, terrified of working with the legend. During a break, the kid made a nervous joke. Something about Wayne's age. His limp. The way he moved slower now. The set went silent. Everyone remembered Glenn Ford. Everyone tensed. Wayne looked at the kid for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the movie star smile. A real one. "Son," Wayne said gently, "come take a walk with me." They disappeared behind the set. They were gone for maybe 20 minutes. When they came back, the kid's face was red from crying. Wayne had his arm around the boy's shoulders. "This young man has something to say," Wayne announced to the crew. The kid, voice shaking, apologized. Not just for the joke. For his arrogance. For thinking cleverness was the same as wisdom. Wayne patted his shoulder. "We all learn," he said quietly. "The question is whether we let the learning make us bitter or better." The kid, who would go on to have a decent career of his own, later said that Wayne had told him the same story he told Glenn Ford. About the war. About the guilt. About the hospital visits nobody photographed. And then, the actor recalled in an interview decades later, "Duke told me something I've never forgotten. He said, every day I wake up and I have a choice. I can let my regrets make me cruel. Or I can let them make me kind. I can use my pain to hurt others. Or I can use it to understand others. That's the only real power any of us have." Choosing what our wounds turn us into. Share and subscribe. Some stories deserve to be remembered. John Wayne died in 1979. Stomach cancer. He faced it the same way he faced everything, quietly, without complaint. At his funeral, Glenn Ford stood in the back row and wept. When reporters asked him later what John Wayne had meant to him, Ford said only, "He taught me that being a man isn't about never making mistakes. It's about what you do after you make them." The last film Wayne made was The Shootist, playing an aging gunfighter dying of cancer. Art imitating life. In the final scene, his character faces death with the same quiet dignity Wayne would show months later. On set that last day, Wayne gave the young actors a piece of advice. "Don't mistake silence for weakness. And don't mistake kindness for softness. The strongest men I ever knew were the ones who could walk away from a fight and still sleep at night." He never mentioned Glenn Ford by name. He didn't have to. The lesson wasn't in the confrontation. It was in what came after. Wayne had chosen to teach rather than destroy. To lift rather than bury. That's what made him Duke.